Welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine presented by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You find us online at tertiumquids.org. Great program for you this week. Joining us as we get into this Labor Day weekend from the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky is their election law reform and senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Justice Studies in the Heritage Foundation. He's a good friend of the program, Hans von Spakovsky. Welcome back to the program, Hans. How are you doing this weekend?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me back.
Not at all. Now, you were just covering, and certainly this story goes back to the great old days of 2009 and 2010 as the IRS, in many cases intentionally, or at least that seems to be the investigation, were they intentionally targeting conservative groups like Tea Party organizations as they were trying to form and get their 501c3 status in time for perhaps having impact and having events and holding events and delaying them until after the 2010 elections. This has been still ongoing, and now the Trump administration has taken it on. And by your last column, it seems like you've been finding that even the Trump administration has been dragging its heels regarding investigating the IRS. Take us inside the story.
Sure. People may recall we didn't discover this until 4 years ago when one of the inspector generals at the Treasury Department came out with a report about it. And almost immediately, many of the groups who were affected by this filed a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. I'm sure people have a hard time believing that lawsuit is still going on 4 years later. Now, the reason it's still going on is that the U.S. Justice Department, under the Obama administration, which is responsible for defending the IRS in court, has spent the last 4 years fighting a constant battle to prevent the IRS from having to provide any information, any documents, or anything else to the people who have sued them. And you would have thought this would change once the Trump administration came in, but for reasons that I frankly don't know or understand, that hasn't changed. And the reason we know that, Joe, is because about 2 weeks ago, a federal judge in the District of Columbia held a hearing and then issued an order telling the IRS, quit delaying. It's finally time for you to provide all the documents that have been requested, and more specifically, to answer a series of questions. And one of the questions, and one of the most important ones, was identify the employees at the IRS who were engaged in this kind of behavior and who targeted these groups. And, for 4 years, the government's been trying to prevent that information from getting out.
Well, it was, I think the first story was, well, that'll take some time for us to figure out. And then after that period of time had expired, then it became more of the song and dance of, there's confidentiality and personnel records and all the different things that people use to hide when even just the simplest FOIA requests are posted.
Yeah, and the latest that they've argued is, well, this whole lawsuit ought to be just thrown out. Everything's moot now because the IRS quit its bad behavior, and so there's no point in doing anything further on it. The judge, fortunately, isn't buying that. But again, it's time for the political people, the political appointees at the Justice Department, to take control of this over from the career folks who've been, like I said, leading this mulish, stubborn fight to not cooperate. And they need to say to those lawyers, tell the IRS to cooperate, to get the information so we can finally clean this up.
What is the potential damage? Let's say they find, all the things that they want to find. And understand, if you sue somebody, this is somebody's right. If you sue a McDonald's, you can get the data you need to make this case. I mean, this is just part of what I think in a criminal case would be called discovery. Correct, Hans? That
is exactly right. They've been in this discovery fight for years now.
So what potentially could be the financial impact of this case if all the plaintiffs, if all the Tea Party organizations and other conservative groups that were trying to get their 501c3 status, especially in time for the election cycle of 2010, were delayed and obscured and pushed aside? I don't know what the total number of all the suits would equal. What kind of ramifications financially are we talking about?
Well, here's the key damage that all these organizations suffered. Anybody who's been in the nonprofit world knows that the key factor in being able to raise money is getting tax-exempt status.
Right.
That's what it takes to do that. Everybody knows that. And it would seem to me that if they actually got to a damages stage in the trial, if the judge found the IRS and people there liable, the damages are going to be these organizations will have to show all the donors who potentially would have contributed money to them or told them, I'll contribute money to you, but when they couldn't get their tax-exempt status from the IRS, said, well, I'm not going to give you any money. Mm-hmm. All the loss in donations, that's their damages.
When you talk about this kind of thing, this is chilling because it really is a place where, if you want to use the word swamp, it becomes the most profound in my mind, Hans. And we're visiting with Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation on the IRS case, which is still being obscured by clouds. That the idea that first, the government establishes the rules by which you have to organize yourself to have this speech, and then can drag its feet in its bureaucratic way to kill your ability to do it. It almost seems like there could be a decent case that even having these kind of requirements, where it's not just fill out the form, once the form is filled out, you're approved for 501c3 status. And then you just go forward from there. You're almost talking about a First Amendment violation when you have this sort of arbitrary, we'll investigate the case when we get to it, and then we'll approve your 501c3 when we do, because there are strict rules if you're a 501c3 as to the things you can do and things you can't do anyway. So it's not just a hall pass to do whatever you want. No,
that's exactly right. And look, apparently, talking to lawyers that I know who represent nonprofits and regularly dealt with the IRS, they said, before this happened, it was pretty routine, the application to get this tax-exempt status. It was usually granted within a month, 6 weeks. You did simply fill out a form, and it was done. It was only when the Obama folks got in, and career people who were sympathetic to the Obama folks, that they decided to use these rules as a way of getting at people they consider to be their political and ideological opponents. And there's been really no assurance that I've seen yet that this attitude and the ability to abuse this authority, because that's what happened, has been taken care of.
Now, take us into the story. You were talking about, you tell the story of how one of the Justice Department lawyers, I think it's Laura Connor, told the judge that the IRS should not be forced to, quote, respond to far-reaching inquiries. Now, is she a Trump appointee, or was she a holdover from the swamp monsters that were there through the Obama administration? No,
I think she's one of the career people there. So she's taken her direction from the other career folks there. But what folks need to understand, and I actually outlined this 2 years ago in a book that I wrote about the Justice Department under Eric Holder, is that the vast majority, unfortunately, of civil career people there are Democrats. They're liberals. They're very sympathetic to the Democratic Party, and even in their career slots, often they frankly will conduct themselves in a way they think will help their political side of the aisle. The judge, by the way, when she said that, he wasn't taking that. He basically said to them that the IRS needed to get all this out on the table. They needed to lay it on the line, put it out there. It said, why hide the ball? If there's nothing there, there's nothing there. But he was pretty clear. He wanted the IRS and DOJ to stop these delaying tactics and finally give the plaintiffs in this case the information they've been seeking for 4 years.
It's interesting in my little hypocrite censor that the IRS, who can tell you with some great detail how many Americans have avoided paying the Obamacare, or have gone the Obamacare penalty route rather than buy health insurance, and they can tell you with great detail when you have to go in for an audit, which forms you filed and what pen you used to sign it. All of a sudden, when they're asked to do the same scrutiny internally, they seem to not know where the computers are.
Yeah, and can't identify the people who actually worked on the files. Yeah, look, it's tragic and sad, but also kind of funny. Just think about what would happen if the IRS were going after a corporation for supposed wrongdoing under the tax law, and the corporation used all the same kind of excuses that the IRS has been using for the last 4 years to avoid providing documents, to avoid giving the names of key employees who were involved in decision-making. You and I both know the IRS would be yelling and screaming in court and trying to put everybody in jail.
Yeah, there would be orange jumpsuits for everybody. Now, you mentioned that they wanted a list of the IRS employees involved in this. Well, didn't they also didn't the judge also ask about why this behavior was going on and what specific actions they took? What do you expect the IRS is going to say to those sorts of things after 4 years of supposedly looking?
Well, I think they may finally be forced to admit what they were doing. But, the judge said they have to specifically answer with each of the organizations in the lawsuit. And there's more than, I think, 24 different organizations that have sued, including Tea Parties from all over the country. Mm-hmm. And the IRS has been directed to say not give a general answer, but on each specific organization, why was their exemption delayed? Why were they not granted that exemption? Why did you ask for, voluminous, unnecessary, irrelevant information? They're going to have to answer that question. And they're also being told by the judge, what specific actions have you, the IRS, taken to remedy the discrimination, again, that each of these specific organizations suffered?
Was there catch us up, Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation, and one of their senior legal fellows, especially as it comes to government reform. Was there a difference? I know some Tea Parties didn't get held up, some did. Was there a connection? Was it the larger the market, the more they got held up, or was there differences? Because I know some Tea Parties organized as straight nonprofits, others set up, I guess it goes down into what 501c whatever extension it is. Some of them were 501c2s, some were 501c3s. Was there any correlation between how these conservative groups filed for their tax-exempt status that might have been at play in this? No, we don't really know because the IRS hadn't been giving us the information. So we don't really know why some of them were treated differently than others. I mean, that's what the whole point of this lawsuit is to try to find that out. But look, this targeting, we generally say they were going after Tea Party organizations, but they were actually going after anybody, and this is straight language from an internal memo at the IRS, any organization, quote, involved in limiting / expanding government and educating on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I mean, that, can you imagine? The IRS thought that if you're an organization that educates people on the Constitution and their rights, that's radical, and they need to be impeded for doing that. We here in our flagship city of Charlottesville have been in the national headlines quite a bit over the last few weeks, Hans, and I'm not going to bring it up because it'd be nice to have a weekend where we didn't discuss it per se, outside of this abstract. And it seems, chronicling all the events that have gone around, the protests and the counter-protests and the things that have come based on the protests, that I asked earlier about free speech provisions regarding these 501c3 filings and organizations that might be seeking to teach about the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. It's become more apparent to me that for the first time, the radical left has put the Second Amendment aside for the time being and is going after the First Amendment, perhaps realizing finally that if you take away the First Amendment, all the other ones are eventually going to fall anyway. Talk about, as somebody who is a senior fellow in government reform, this chilling approach towards the First Amendment where just like college campuses are setting up, quote, free speech zones, we hear more and more governors like Virginia's Governor McAuliffe talking about restricted speech and permitting for different types of organizations based on what their message is going to be.
Yeah, I have to tell you, this is like one of the scariest periods I've experienced in my lifetime, because we don't just have mayors and organizations saying that the First Amendment rights of people should be curtailed, that they don't have First Amendment rights if they're saying something that they disagree with, but we have violence. The latest, you saw just at Berkeley, violence against people saying that the First Amendment is important, and we have assaults and people with masks on going after folks for wanting to uphold the First Amendment. It's a terrible, terrible development, and campuses all over the country aren't helping this with the very restrictive rules that they're putting in about the First Amendment. And frankly, by not taking the kind of strong measures that need to be taken against those who threaten violence, not enough is being done about that.
Isn't this essentially what Patrick Henry and George Mason were getting at when they insisted that there be a Bill of Rights attached to the Constitution? Because as I read history, their fear was a centralized government that was going to become European-style top-down rule, and that a Bill of Rights that restricted the things a government like the American U.S. Constitution would create, limit what they could do and the scope of it?
Oh, yeah, it absolutely was, and thank goodness their views prevailed that we need a Bill of Rights. I mean, I would hate to think where we would be today without that.
When I talk to people about this, they point at portions that almost like they want a line item veto on the First Amendment. They want to just take the parts about free speech and gatherings, but they want to leave the no establishment of religion part in there, but they want to take out the free press, and it seems like they want to pick and choose the things they like. I like the fact that Madison, when he finally came up with the list, included 7 different protections just in the First Amendment alone. So there isn't just we'll just scratch this one out and it'll just address one thing, because if you take out the whole First Amendment, you're really impacting 7 different protections. Yeah,
that's particularly true. You really see that in the religious freedom that is outlined in the First Amendment. You have all these individuals now, particularly, again, some government officials who believe that while you may have the right to practice your religious beliefs in your home, once you step out your front door, they don't want you doing that. And it's a pretty straight-out violation of the First Amendment that, unfortunately, a lot of popular culture thinks is the right way to apply it.
Unless it's Sharia, and then you can set up a Sharia court there as well. So where do we go? What is your sense, Hans, as to what the outcome, what happens if they don't comply? What's the timetable for them to comply with Judge Walton's ruling?
Well, he gave them until mid-October to get all of this information to the parties in this case, to the challengers. And I reading. You don't get this so much from the order, but if you read the transcript of the hearing that Judge Walton held, it seemed to me he's kind of at the end of his patience with the IRS and DOJ. So I think if they don't come up with everything he's ordered them to, I think there's going to be pretty severe consequences for these government officials and potentially their lawyers.
Now, we've grown so, I guess, battle-weary over the last 2 or 3 years, we hear about hearings, or we'll watch hearings with various people testifying about what they knew and when, and nobody ever walks out in handcuffs. So when you say severe penalties, is this, I'm sorry, you can't use the parking garage for the next month kind of penalties, or could there potentially be people seeing jail time or at least some serious cash money fines?
Now, the judge could do everything from hold specific individuals in contempt, including the lawyers in the case, to when a party really misbehaves in the case, oftentimes the judge can consider striking their pleading. So that means that he could come back and say the defense is that the IRS has put up to having any liability, they're out of the case.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a variety of things the judge could do. I don't know if it'll get to that point, but it's pretty clear right now the IRS had better comply with this latest order.
Last one for you, Hans, and certainly this goes to something that the president talked about, was the idea of a flat rate tax, where certainly you would have to have an accounting department at Treasury, but certainly with the progressive taxes that we have in the United States, the IRS has such almost a shadow government authority, whereas if it was just, it's 15% tax, make your check payable to the U.S. Department of Treasury, all of a sudden the IRS goes back to just being an accounting firm and not this administrative and policing body.
Well, actually, I think that would be a great idea. Anything that would reduce the size of the IRS and reduce the number of bureaucrats and the rules they can use to interfere with your everyday life and your everyday business, I think would be a good thing.
Well, yeah, I think it's almost essential to getting back there because it's a shadow government. It's a way to, like I said, curtail free speech, or just shut an organization down altogether. And sometimes after a year or two, say, "Oops, we're sorry, we're wrong. Have a nice day," when the damage has already been profoundly done.
Yeah, and that certainly happened in this case because we know that there were organizations that basically disbanded because they just didn't have the resources to deal with the IRS.
Well, in several places where perhaps the information they wanted to educate people on never got out because the heresy of teaching the Constitution or the First Amendment or the entire Bill of Rights would certainly have changed things. Hans, what are you working on now? Are you just watching for the outcome of this case? What else are you working on as we watch the swamp monsters fight back?
Well, I'm keeping a careful eye out on the political pointees that the president's making and hoping and seeing what they actually do once they get inside the executive branch. And the same way that I reported on this problem, if other folks don't change policies and don't change the bad things the Obama administration did, I'm going to keep writing about it.
I have heard from 4 different friends of mine who were either on landing teams at state, the National Security Council, EPA, Department of Education, that almost immediately the career politicians, you mentioned most of them tend to think liberal, probably because they've made a career out of being the big centralized government, fought back, and many of them were kicked off the landing teams very quickly. Is that concerning that this agenda of drain the swamp is a nice bumper sticker but isn't going to actually come out to be anything?
If that's what happens in this administration, yeah, I would be extremely frustrated and extremely disappointed because the entire executive branch needs to be a lot smaller and needs to have a lot less power. That's the only way to get it out of our everyday lives.
What do you think happens then, just as somebody who's studied many presidencies and many administrations, different Congresses, if this president couldn't do it, what's to, say Mike Pence or Ted Cruz or some other Republican runs, and, what's the hope of them doing it? Or do we just go into a place where it's like the British, parliamentary elections, we want this kind of big government. No, we want this kind of big government. And that becomes the debate, not whether or not the American people are sovereign anymore?
Well, I tell you, if we don't take care of this problem, it's going to get taken care of for us because you and I both know the budget is so big and we are so in debt that at some point, if we don't fix this, if we don't reduce the size of the government, how much we're spending, the country as the economy and the government is going to go bankrupt.
No, that's the frightening thing, because then it becomes France in the 18th century, and I don't like the way that ended. So, Hans, I hope you keep feet to the fire. Thank you for writing in the Daily Caller and continue your work at Heritage and keeping your eye on it. Maybe this story is one of the harbingers of some good things that will come out of it. I do appreciate your time, and thank you, sir, and have a wonderful Labor Day weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I don't know why we feel compelled to do this, but in media, sometimes we always seem to need an analogy. If you think X, then Y is... if you thought Harry Potter had a rough life, then you haven't read A Child Called It yet. And moreover than the inspiration you get from the book is once you get to meet Dave Pelzer, the author, and the main character, you find out not only is he somebody who survived, but he's survived as perhaps one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And after reading his story, you certainly would give him a hall pass on having some dark spots, and we all have them, but it's just every time you meet Dave Pelzer or talk to him, you walk away saying, how is this guy just, you feel better when you talk to him, and it's an amazing thing. And I've had a few chances to do it, and I'm glad to have him back on the program because there's big doings in his world. Dave, good morning, and welcome back to the program here at WCHV in Charlottesville. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, sir. Good morning to you. And how are you folks doing over there?
Well, we're healing a little bit, but we had a rough weekend a couple of weeks ago. And
I might have scanned that in the news, my friend.
Well, if you did, you probably saw me because I was trying to cover it and get in the middle of it. Not for
oh my goodness,
I'm the kind of heavy-set guy with a big long ponytail that is getting sprayed by both sides with pepper spray. I wear that as a badge of bipartisanship.
Run, Forrest, run.
Yeah, well, that's what my wife was yelling at the screen. But I wanted to make sure I had the whole story, so I wasn't giving narrative. I wasn't picking one side or another, and I was trying to point out some of the things that I think even the president grasped, but no one else did because it didn't fit their narrative regarding it. But we're getting past it, and this is what I'm talking about. Dave's life has been, if you think August 12th in Charlottesville was a bad weekend, Dave's childhood was like that every day. And your book, just as a backstory, I came across your book. I was working in a Barnes & Noble during a period of unemployment. And I came across the book and I started reading it. It was one of those books that I felt so bad reading your story. I had to keep reading because I knew there had to be a better ending at it somewhere. And I was finally rewarded with an amazing uplifting feeling at the end as you go through the series. It's A Child Called It. And then I forget the second one. And then the third one is A Man Called Dave, where you become, a decorated pilot war hero. But I mean, moreover than that is the person you are now. And just for the listeners who have never heard your story, what brought you to put pen to paper and write this chronicle of your young childhood in horrible conditions through your rescue?
Well, in a quick nutshell, my case was supposedly one of the worst cases of child abuse in California's history in the late 60s to early 70s in the Bay Area of California, and the dynamic was everybody knew what was happening to me. I mean, my father was a firefighter, and he refused to step in. He was very passive, and he was an alcoholic, unfortunately. Neighbors saw me deteriorate. I would go to school with such tattered clothing and that sweaty layers of sweat from not being allowed to bathe, gaunt skin, and kids would regurgitate. I mean, I was stealing lunches. Everybody knew about this, and finally, it was the first Friday in March of 1973 in which I showed up at the school in such a condition that the teachers called the authorities. They took one look at me and says, oh, yeah, this is definitely child abuse. Because back in those days, it's almost like, let's say, I mean, there's no comparison to a riot in a beautiful southern city of Virginia than penal codes to protect kids back in my day, or those trying to protect kids. And it was just an unfortunate situation that my mother was abused as a child. It was a generational thing. She wasn't allowed to talk about it or get the help she needed. and it's a learned behavior, just as we see in some parts of society to this day. Whether it's hate groups or bullies. It's almost like I punch you in the arm and you punch someone else in the face 100 times just to get even.
Right.
And my situation, to me, was always about, okay, if my mom doesn't feed me for a week. Oh. Now, let's think about that. One entire week without a morsel of food, I would steal water. Or during school days, unfortunately, I'm so embarrassed to this day. I'm very shameful of it. I would steal lunches from kids, or part of a sandwich, or part of an apple, or if she would beat me, I would tighten up parts of my body. So to me, it was always about that counter effect.
Right.
So the book basically, I gave myself a few years to get my act together. First, it was like 5 years, 10 years, and I was in the armed forces, and I got involved in child abuse once again, prevention and foster care, and becoming a counselor in juvenile hall. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice that I have a very young boy. I'm in the armed forces doing okay for myself. If I can write my teachers a thank you letter, and the child called it, the book, became a quasi-long letter. And I'm very proud to say this. The book was given to my teachers on the exact date of my rescue, 20 years to the exact day. I'm very anal.
Well, it's okay.
and it was such an honor. And I still have a photo. It's weird. And I mean, Joe, this, and some of the fans who've run across. I've been privileged to meet with presidents and celebrities and people of supposed stature. But I think one of my most prized possessions is a photo of my teachers, and they're holding up the little book at the time, and they're all smiling and giving me a thumbs up and stuff like that. And it's an honor. And that book eventually was printed in '93, published in '95, officially published. It was printed before. And then it made the New York Times list in '97. So my life is, I'm always late to the prom, but once I show up, I'm going to dance.
A 20-year overnight success. But I mean, I'm sure that my story is not unique. That I just was so moved by, and I still am as I'm talking to you, 30 years in broadcasting, that, we all need a place of perspective. So when our challenges, where our world throws bad stuff at us, we can ride that wave and find the better place at the end of it.
And the thing is, Joe, and sometimes I get, oh, my God, he's about abuse, or I'm a victim of abuse like David. No. Stop. Because when I meet people or do shows, I always want to give them something. Here's the takeaway. Here's the nugget. The truth of the matter is, at any time, at any place, and we're seeing this right now in Houston and Texas, and we're seeing this in Louisiana, anything can happen. Everybody falls down. Life is unfortunate, cancer, divorce, or whatever. But if you can do something for the now, okay, evacuate, take the prize photos, get grandma, help your neighbor out, do something, a small thing. Because I think in society right now, oh, my God, I want to win the billionaire Trump lotto. I want to win it all. I want to conquer Mount Everest. I'm going to lose 1 million pounds. No. Work out 5 minutes a day. Save $1 a day.
Yep.
Make people laugh 3 times a day. Do those small things, and that's what I had to do as a kid. And I was very fortunate to be in foster care and then to join the armed forces and make the most of certain things. And to me, it's just making those small baby steps. Because I will say this, and I have to say this in this day and age, I'm the luckiest person I know. But at the same time, I've earned my luck doing the same program, per se, after 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Sure. Oh,
so there
absolutely.
is perspective, maturity, and there's luck. Because the other side of that coin is I really should be dead, or I should be rotting away in jail, or be joining up some terrorist hate group. Oh, my gosh, you think you had it bad. Oh, I hate people, too.
Right.
That doesn't work. And to have that mentality, to me, you're definitely on the wrong side of history.
I always feel like some of these books that I've read, I'm the only one who's ever read them. So I begin into sort of the elevator speech about the book, and I try to explain it. And everyone's like, "No, I read that book. I know that book. That's going to be a movie. That's so good." I've been telling everybody, Dave, that it's coming to the screen, and I was so glad to hear that it wasn't just somebody bought the premise to the story and is making it into a movie. Give it to Cameron Crowe or somebody, but you're involved, because to me, I want to make sure that your hand is involved in this story, because it's so easily just a premise that somebody could turn into a movie.
Ever since '97 when it made the list, the book, and it was on the list for 6 years, which is crazy. The average stay in the New York Times is like 3 weeks.
Right.
Okay, And I remember being on buses in Japan, not billboards, buses is the big thing. And that was the thing, is like, we had people who were very genuine, stars and producers. There was a lady, A-list lady, who was very pregnant, going to all the studios saying, this is my next movie. And they said, no, we know you, we know Dave, but this book is not a movie. And I didn't understand the code. Because if you really read the book is not a movie.
I don't know the code.
And that's what I'm saying, is you have to make it into, okay, here's the visual part of it.
Right.
Who's telling the backstory to it, in a sense. So what I had to do is come up with a dynamic, oh my gosh, yeah, tell the story, have certain scenes in there, of what happened, but how did it happen?
Mm-hmm. And then make it fit.
And there has to be what they call threads and so forth. And I got to tell you, again, there's parts that are and we're not, and it's going to be PG-13.
Right.
I was adamant that we're not going to show anything.
Right. No.
Which is, I've studied films, Joe, for years. I've studied Hitchcock. I just got done reading over 2,500 pages on Citizen Kane alone.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Oh, I know how they shot that, or I know what they showed and didn't show. Mm-hmm. What I like about this is you're obviously going to root for the kid, the little boys, we call them. And there was even parts you can understand how the character of, my mother, Kathy's character, just tumbled. And there's parts that are just so beautiful, like when the little boy's at the Russian River with his mom, and his mom pulls him in and hugs him. That carries. And what I want to do in the back end of the third act is when Kathy drops David off at school. And she's given him the line of the day, like, oh, tell Joe, tell Principal Hanson, oh, you ran into a doorknob, you got hit by a baseball bat. And she looks at herself in the mirror and says, oh, my God, what have I become?
Right.
It's almost like when Darth Vader took off his mask and became human.
Ooh.
There's parts that are so beautiful. And there's going to be parts that are going to be, probably tearjerker-esque, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to tell the story of when something happens to.
Well, but the story is a tearjerker. I mean, I'm in here interviewing you, and I'm still thinking back to it, and I'm welling at points, Dave, about it, because I've now raised 3 kids. I had young children when I first read your book, and maybe it always hung in the back of my thought process as a parent. I don't know, but I'd like to think it had that much impact on me, and turning it into a film, your first reaction is what I would say is, how do you convert this? So will these be a series of movies, or is it going to try to tell the whole narrative?
What's weird is, and I'm still in, this is a weird analogy. I have been invited to the prom so many times. Okay? and especially when Hollywood, oh, baby, I love you. You're the only one I love you. I'm going, okay. You're just using me, and this ain't going anywhere. I mean, I've got dressed, got on my shoes, brushed my tooth, combed the hair, and the limo just drives right past you. But now I'm saying I'm officially engaged. Papers have been signed.
Okay. So there's somebody actually going to show up with a camera.
Part of it, again, is, this is going to be an independent film, because the independent films are doing very well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And they get a lot of attention in the field. Because what I've learned over the years, unless it's Avengers or productions of James Bond, you really don't see a lot of films like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in the publishing world, they thought, oh, we can't publish a child called it. This is about abuse. I says, no, it's about resilience. It's a universal message.
Yep. It's
so
overcome.
We're going to make it an independent film, and we have amazing people, and I'm not allowed to say right now who we're looking at for actors and actresses, but it's almost like now that it's been announced, everybody's coming to us. Because, oh, my God, I've read that book. My daughter, my husband, all my friends have read the book. So they know the story.
That's
so it's
great.
just, and I think the thought process of actually we're going to start shooting, we're thinking spring of next year in your backyard. We're looking at Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, okay. That's a beautiful setting.
Yeah, and it has to do, with, I guess I don't understand the business, but tax breaks or all these things they do.
Incentives.
But we've already, shot the school. We did still photos of the school and the house, and and all those different things. And this is sad. I mean, I feel a little bit like Mr. Wells and Citizen Kane. I'm behind the scenes. And I'm one of the screenwriters to it. And for good or ill, they even said, would you like to be in the picture, do a cameo? And I said, well, I have a face for radio. So I do not know if I've been asked to possibly play the role of the police officer at the very end of the film that takes that little boy into custody.
I know you're doing radio now. I see the radio podcasts on your website at davepelzer.com.
Yeah, I think we'll have to take a little hiatus because this thing is just overwhelming. And I'll say this one: I want to make sure if we do something, please contact my office and if we can do something in your state. And I'm going to say this, and I have to. One thing I've learned about publishing or the book business or anything is I have to raise my hand and ask questions. And I would love to come to the area and do the premiere thing, one of the premiere things or the viewings, but I want to make it into a fundraiser too.
Sure, absolutely.
And I'm going to be very adamant about that. I mean, whether I go to San Francisco, New York, or Sundance, and I want to make sure funds go directly. And I'm going to say this, and hopefully it's not going to come out the wrong ways. I've donated unlimited funds to charities and events and so forth, and I found out over time that even though they say I donated, let's say $100, only a fraction of that would go to the cause.
Yeah, it's very hard.
So, folks, if you're thinking about donating to some of these causes in the wake of Henry or Harvey, rather, please make sure it goes to where it's supposed to go to.
Well, and that's what you talk about. The opposite side of the coin you're on, Dave, is all these, you mentioned shysters, these guys who have made some get-rich-quick scheme out of text Harvey to my text number and give me $10 and we'll help the needy.
Right.
Our Attorney General's office is just overrun with claims of scams. I mean, we're really supporting the Salvation Army and the Red Cross and the Rubicon group there, as those are verifiable people that I know in many cases that are in Houston right now trying to help those who I don't know, you don't even see the end of the tunnel. You're not even aware you're in a tunnel. It's so long when you face something.
Yeah, and that's what I want to do. Like because I've already discussed with the producer and director because they're very generous. And said, "What do you want?" I says, "Well, I want to do fundraisers," and I said, "I want my teachers to walk the red carpet." And they look at me and I'm going, no, this is happening. I don't care where they're at, or like one teacher passed away, so her daughter's going to walk it. Yeah. I want them to feel like they're rock stars for a single day. And that's the one thing I like to do is make people feel good about themselves. And and that's what's nice about, let's say, our relationship is, we'll meet or we'll talk on the phone and hopefully people will go, wow, I wasn't expecting Joe to say that or Dave to say that, and give them something different and make them feel enlightened and hopefully just a little bit more happier in sometimes the darkest of days.
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you so much again. And we'll talk many times before the film hits the big screen, I'm sure, because I want to keep updated on how that's going. And God bless you, and thank you for putting a little light into the day, and I hope as many people can help. What's your go-to for Harvey right now? Are you doing Red Cross relief? Or
I like the Salvation Army.
Salvation Army?
I've done a lot of work with the Red Cross, and I like the Salvation Army and the Red Cross, of course. But when my father was homeless as a firefighter, he would actually wash dishes for an entire day just to get the lunch meal. And I know that sounds weird. I have never forgotten that act of kindness to my father. Well, so I do like the Red Cross, but I like the Salvation Army too. Well, or you know what I do too is sometimes I'll just find a family and I'll verify that need and just write them a check directly.
Oh, that's even
kind
better.
of weird, but I mean, I don't want things to get filtered down.
No, you're absolutely right, and we're about to do the Salvation Army telethon here in Charlottesville, and they put me on television, which is usually a bad idea, but it works out for them, and we simulcast, and it's great. The Shields, who run the Salvation Army here in Charlottesville, again, you think prosperous college town, but there's a big part of our population that's in that borderline and teetering right on, one bad week away from homelessness, and God bless them for being there. They do the Lord's work every day.
Well, sir, thank you for all the work that you do for your family and your community at large. And I would love to, keep this conversation going. And
absolutely.
And it's going to be a process. We're thinking right now the movie's going to premiere mid-2019 or 2019. I'm sorry about
that's
that.
All right. Well, we'll mark it on.
It's going to be a process, but we have. I can't. I mean, once it's all done, I'm going to be smiling like, oh, my gosh. Like, we have a beautiful musician that I've known for over 20 years. He has 22 Grammys.
Oh,
22.
Gosh, 22
You know.
Grammys. That's amazing.
Uh-huh.
So
yeah, it's and the support of the whole thing. And I'm hoping I can, you and I can take a photo on the carpet, and I'll look at you and say, we did it,
and raise money for something.
difference.
I have to ask you though, having been a student of movies as a kid, and you all the city, what's it like now that you're inside making a movie? Is it as good as you'd imagined it would be?
Well, it's almost like, again, I'm engaged. Oh my God, and there's so much stuff I have to do before the wedding, So it's like everybody's excited for me, but I can't be too excited. I have to focus on, the work.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, too, I go to the fire station and I do a little bit called Hollywood Dave, like I'm George Costanza. Hollywood Dave's not happy. Where's his latte? Do not gaze upon my greatness. So I get a lot of grounding.
I'm sure the guys at the fire station love that.
Of Hollywood Day with Cosmo Kramer and George Costanza. And then you run out and you get a call. Okay, sewage leak. Oh, okay. How are you feeling now, Dave? But Dave doesn't like this.
Yeah, Dave's going to that. Put him on that one right there. Oh, God bless. That's great. Thank you so much. Dave Pelzer,
right.
DavePelzer.com, and the child call date coming very soon. Thank you, sir. Have a great morning.
All right. Good too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And thank you again for listening and tuning in across the Commonwealth for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Thanks to our guests. You can check us out on tertiumquids.org, get podcasts and all that stuff, and find out more about the Tuesday Morning Group Coalition. Until next weekend, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.